Greetings, brothers and sisters. Remember this from Charlie Brown?
Charlie Brown,
Charlie Brown, I got a thing for you. This is going to be an epic video. I mean, in terms of, at least for me, right? I don't know how it's going to be for you. But for me, this is an epic video that is, somebody sent me or they left a comment with a link to a YouTube video of General betray us from the Gulf Wars. And he says something so stunning. I very seldom, I do this every day, right? I cover this stuff. And, I don't get like excited over something. But I can't wait to tear that guy apart. Like like what he says, like I've been thinking about it since I watched it last night. I couldn't wait till get up this morning and deal with that quote. Then there's another quote about from this Jewish person about Zionism that's also stunning. My wife sent me a week or two ago, and I've been waiting to find the right video to put it in. So I want to get to that. So this is an epic video. I got this whole big thing with Jojo Magoo. He made another gaffe. So I want to start here because this is the theme. This is the thread running through the pearls of American ghoulism, right? It starts here with Lucy and Charlie Brown.
Charlie Brown.
I can't believe it. She must think I'm the most stupid person alive.
Yeah, he's not going to fall for that again. This guy, this stellar young man, this 50-year-old little neurotic and depressed kid, he's not falling for that again with his fancy shirt with the crooked stripe down the middle. He's not falling for that again in Lucy.
Come on, Charlie Brown. I'll hold the ball and you kick it.
And so this is a metaphor, certainly for Democrats and liberals who, believe in the government, but certainly for Republicans as well. That, how many times you need to go through this before you realize they're pulling the ball away from you, right? This is a great metaphor for what's going on right now, certainly with Jojo Magoo, but everyone else as well, right? That, the ball's getting pulled away. We know it. Like it's happened before so many times. It's going to happen again. And so, how can you not watch what's going on, especially after the Afghan war and all the things that are going on? We go to Jojo Magoo. How can you not watch Jojo Magoo and realize you voted for a guy who's not competent? And the same thing with Republicans. I did this thing on the Cubies. I'll show that. Let me show that right here.
Dear Great Pumpkin, I'm looking forward to your arrival on Halloween night.
So first he takes a hit off the hopium pipe.
Pumpkin patch, and you'll see the Great Pumpkin with your own eyes.
And then he tries to get his bitch hooked on hopium.
Sitting in a pumpkin patch with a blockhead. You owe me restitution!
Then his bitch realizes she's in love with a hopium addict and she wants her Skittles. She's been cheated out of her Skittles. And now his sister, who sees that her hopium addict's brother is strung out on hopium, has to go and retrieve him from the pumpkin patch.
I've done a lot of stupid things in my life, too.
Stupid? What do you mean, stupid?
You sat in a pumpkin patch all night long waiting for a pumpkin man to rescue you. It's high on hopium, and he never came. That's what we mean by stupid.
Just wait till next year, Charlie Brown. You'll see. Next year at this same time, I'll find a pumpkin patch that is real sincere.
But after all the evidence has been presented that Q, the Great Pumpkin, doesn't exist, is not going to save you, still in denial, lashing out, angry, waiting for the next hit off the hopium pipe. Because the Cubies, it's the Charlie Brown, for whatever reason, has these great, in terms of this, weird show for kids, because his character is not a kid-friendly character, right? I don't know how Charlie Brown was ever for kids. Like, we watched it because there was nothing else on for kids. We watched, growing up, you watch this every, this is the Thanksgiving Day special, and you watch the Halloween one and the Christmas. It's Christmas Charlie Brown. But they were never really kid-friendly. The kids, the guy's depressed, a middle-aged man, right? But anyways, this happens.
Hold it! Ha! You'll pull it away and I'll land flat on my back and kill myself. But
No, he's not going to do that again. This is the American people, right? Being duped again.
Charlie Brown, it's Thanksgiving.
what's that got to do with anything?
It's different this time, Charlie Brown.
But one of the greatest traditions we have is the Thanksgiving Day football game. And the biggest, most important tradition of all is the kicking off of the football.
Yeah, in the military aspect of football.
Is that right?
Absolutely. Come on, Charlie Brown. It's a big honor for you.
Well, if it's that important, a person should never turn down a big honor.
His ego's been stroked here. It's another way that he's being conned, and of course, we know what happens.
Besides, she wouldn't try to trick me on a traditional holiday.
The American media and the American government, the military specifically, CIA, they don't care about American traditions, right? They use them to manipulate Americans, how great they are, how important, how sanctimonious they'll get over things. But they don't care about them, right? They're not sacred. Nothing's sacred to them except what they think is sacred. And it has nothing to do with you or America.
This time I'm gonna kick that football clear to the moon!
There he goes, right? And that's the look of, the media and the American government and Hollywood as they pull the football out from under you time and time again. And that's the American people right there, right? Upside down and screaming as the football gets yanked out from under you yet again. Like, how many times do they have to do it to you before you realize they're not good people and they're not here for you and they're not on your side, right? It's all a lie. The American culture, everything that you're told, your importance to them, what they, think about you as a person, and the way they treat the rest of the world. They're not people-friendly, people-positive, godly people that have a connection to God and are, there for you and everybody else. So I've been covering how the American system, and not just the American system, the global system, the worldwide economic system, political system, the orientation to the world, the disconnection from God, and a system that's not built on divine principles, not built on natural human behavior, natural spiritual behavior, that is an abomination of the divine creation, something that's deviating severely from the divine will and laws, and is about deception. It runs on deception. So people who are deceivers, people who align themselves with something that is demonic at its very core, and when I say demonic, I mean something that goes against the will of God, goes against the natural order of things, something that is like I said, an abomination, has to be fueled by deception and lies, right? And so people who tell the truth, and the truth itself is an enemy, it's the kryptonite to such a system, right? You bring in love, divine energy to that sort of system, and it can't take it because the system is feeds off of lies and deception. So if you're a deceiver, you're rewarded. And if you're a truther, if somebody's seeking the truth or bringing the truth, to light, you are an enemy of the state, right? You are a potential threat to the demonic system. And so it's an upside down system. And I've been covering that extensively in the last two videos. And this is maybe, I guess, part 3 of a series of this. But the fundamental problem is this, that everybody wants to be seen as a hero. It's hard to motivate people if you are an evil empire, right? If you're oppressive and even kings and queens have victim consciousness, emperors, people with all the resources who are exploiting other people for their wealth and gain. People who engage in horrible actions think of themselves as the hero. They have, their victim statements and victim stances of why they give themselves permission to do the things they're doing, the rationalization. But everybody wants to think of themselves as the protagonist. All the villains think of themselves as a protagonist. And so to do the things that we're doing on a global basis, these illegal wars, hurting other people in other countries, hurting people in our country, all the evil that's done by the global cabal and the American power structure. The only way to make it, to sell it to the American people is to say that you're fighting against tyrants or whatever they call them, right? The other T word, right? The other people who are bad people. You're the good guys and they're the bad guys. And so Americans think that America is the good country, that we're the benevolent country and we're helping all these other countries by giving them weapons or selling them weapons and, invading their countries and changing their leadership in these illegal wars and all the other things that we do to keep the country going, right? Because our country, we need to do bad things to keep it going. And so, there's the problem. Therein lies the problem, is that the real intention of what we're going to do, and so I'm going to cover this with these other examples, with starting with Jojo Magoo as usual, but going to General Petraeus and this other dude, right? And I'm going to talk about Cynthia McKinney a little bit, so it's a different kind of a video that I haven't, done in a while. But the thing is that they all have in common, the power structure, is they have to tell you something. They have to, make up a reason for these wars or whatever it is, right, that's going on, that hides with a true intention and reason behind these activities. They have to create some sort of an illusion to make it sound like we're the hero, right? And it could be America, it could be any other country. It's all of these power brokers. It has to do with the economy, like when they're selling you something. And so one of the rules is that whatever reason that they tell you we're going to do something, whatever movement it is, right? Whether it's, changing the tax laws, whether it's going to war, whether it's some social agenda, whatever reason they're saying, whatever crisis, whatever, bad thing they're pointing out, whatever wrong they're saying they're trying to right, whether it's a war in Afghanistan, whatever reason they tell you we're going to war in Afghanistan, or, when they said they're shutting down the economy because of COVID, the lockdowns we had in 2020, whatever they're telling you is the reason for something, frisking you at the airport or, whatever it is, right? Whatever the reason they give you, it's never the real reason. And you can see that very evident now with these wars, because the wars that we had, the, two big wars of Afghanistan, Iraq, the military actions in Egypt, and the big one in Libya have not produced the results that they promised, right? The reason we went in, like, for example, Afghanistan, the most recent one, a 20-year war, $2 trillion or more was spent there. And the Taliban have now $80 billion of American weapons. And the Taliban is the reason we went in there, was to get rid of the Taliban and put in a government that would cooperate with, getting rid of these bad actors. And now it's even worse. So, we've made it worse in every place. And we know what happens in these types of wars. We always make it worse, right? Anytime one of these wars is waged, it gets worse. It happens every time. It's happened every time, 100% of the time. And so we know how these wars end. We never achieve the objectives that they promised us. So there's no, sense of, the opium crisis, I'm going to get into that with Petraeus. It's huge. It's a huge revelation. I want to blow through this introduction. But just, remember this rule that whatever they tell you is, when there's a crisis, whatever they tell you, the reason behind the crisis and the reason behind their action, the crisis itself is either manufactured or being used, a natural crisis is being used for them to grab power, and there's a complete evil intention, but they have to explain it away, right? So let's get into this thing with Jojo Magoo. So Jojo Magoo goes to meet with New Jersey leaders. See, they got the boxes behind him, and it's a stage to look like he's on the job for the flooding and things that happened from Hurricane Ida. And I know that he makes a couple of gaffes, and he's in a confused state. Magoo has various states, and one of them's confused. So he comes out, and he takes off his mask. He just leaves it hanging there. And he's in rare form, right? And they're zooming in on him, and the mics aren't on yet. But he's fishing through his work. His mask is still hanging off his ear. And I knew that this is going to be one of his bad performances. Because he looks more confused than normal. I mean, it's a good performance for wrestlers. Finally, he grabs the mask off his ear, looking at everybody like he's getting it done, right? He's straightening out his jacket. He's getting it done, Magoo. There you go. Scratch your head. Looking around. Hey, is somebody supposed to say something? What's going on? Who's starting this thing? He's trying to look confident, and he's just so bad, right? How can, this is another pull the football. How can the American people, especially the ones that voted for him, say that this is competent leadership, right? And he has an epic gaffe coming. These guys are all talking. And then we're going to get into it here. And so they're clapping for him, right? Why are you clapping for him? This guy's a complete joke, right? Coming off the debacle in Afghanistan and the debacle at the southern border. And just his performance all along. Like as a candidate, as a politician, he's just been on the wrong side of everything. And a gaff magnet, and a snoozler and a groper. Like how many times are going to pull the football out from under you? And you're going to look at this guy and say the emperor has dementia, right? and no clothes.
Wish you were here under different circumstances, but you really took a hit, and New Jersey took a hit. Parts of my state as well, but New Jersey, New York.
Your state? Like, I thought they were all your states, right? Let's talk about Delaware for a little bit. Not Louisiana and Alabama and these other places that took the full force of the hurricane, and then the stuff that happened in New Jersey and New York and those areas. But let's talk about Delaware for a little bit.
New York in particular. And I want to begin by thanking Senator Booker for all the work he's doing in the Senate trying to get this infrastructure and other.
He scratched his nose because Senator Booker was laughing at him in the debate. So I'm not going to show you that here, but I've showed it many times. As was Kamala when JoJo couldn't get his story straight.
The things we have to do to not just build back, but build back better than it was before.
Build back better than it was before under Trump.
And I want to thank Representative Watson. And now, am I in your district or I'm in Tommy?
Where am I? Am I in America? Where are we?
I want to thank my FEMA director. She's done one thing and we had a great FEMA director in the past as well.
The FEMA directors are awesome.
That makes it work. When you get local, state, and federal working together, it is more than 3 times. It's like 10 times what it would be if just had.
It's like 10 times when you get local, state, and FEMA working together. Now, this is the kind of statement that they would destroy Trump over. They would crucify Trump over that, right? Where's the factual evidence? Where's the data? Where's the efficiency, accountability? Where's the studies where you can say this? Where's the scientific data, the mathematical data that proves when state and local and FEMA and federal work together, it's not 3 times better, it's 10 times better. So he just made that up, right? This is what they talked about Trump just talking off the cuff and not having his facts straight, just saying things that he had no proof for. You understand this. Remember how much when Trump would say something like this and they would, Oh my God, he just said that it was 10 times better. Where's your proof, Trump? Right? And he's just, this is JoJo, what he does all the time. He just speaks out of turn. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's not well read. He doesn't have, evidence supporting what he says. He says he's places where he isn't, right, which I just covered. Oh, yeah, when I met with that guy, right, and then he didn't meet with, And so, the synagogue thing, he said. They went to synagogues that were, that he never went to.
Having one movie. And the losses that we witnessed today are profound. Dozens of lost lives, homes destroyed in Manville, including by gas leaks triggered by the flooding, damaged infrastructure, including the rail system. And my thoughts are with all those families affected by the storms and all those families who lost someone.
Again, he's got all these tells, right? He's not thinking about them. Like, this is where they say they care and they don't, right? Because they don't care. I mean, they know there needs to be population reduction. The world's overpopulated, whether people want to admit that or not. And these guys, it's a big part of what they're dealing with, because there's going to be big changes, and one of them is to curb population growth. I mean, they have to, in terms of the economic crises that we're facing, that's something they have to do to keep the system going. And of course, they aren't going to say that to you, but it's one of their biggest, if not their biggest, concern is overpopulation.
When they love and understand there's still two people missing, or four people still missing?
Four, double. You're off by 100%. There's 4 people missing, not 2.
And I especially want to thank, and it's an overused phrase, but the brave first responders. We have who have exemplified the courage both in New Jersey and next door in New York. They've done an incredible job. And we're working closely with Governor Murphy, and we're going to continue to do so. I'm here to see firsthand what the damage is and find out.
He just, doesn't inspire confidence. The tone of his voice, lost and clueless. He's not somebody that you would count on to remember something. Like, you wouldn't say, "Hey, JoJo, I'm gonna, can you remind me to do this tomorrow?" And it's like he's clueless. He doesn't even know where he is now, right? He doesn't know where he is even now. This guy isn't somebody who should be in an administrative position. Again, pulling the football out from under people. Like, they just won't admit it. Like, people are in such denial because they just, can't live in a world, in a country that, is what it really is. They have to make some, artificial America, like your own personal Jesus, your own personal America, the way that you have to view America to get up every day and go to work, whether you're Republican or Democrat. The lies and the rationalization you have to tell yourself to go live your life, right?
Directly from you all what is most needed. Now look, FEMA has been, I hope, as responsive as we've intended them to be, and I'm sure they have. 132 persons.
Or you might want to find that out, right? Because it's 10 times better when FEMA works with local and state officials.
Personnel from FEMA so far, including federal search and rescue teams, including 60 individuals, incident management assistant teams, and 20 people to support this response operation.
See, he knows none of this, right? This is you give him a notebook and they say, read through this stuff, which he does, an okay job at. But his presentation is, horrible. It doesn't inspire confidence. He's there to show everyone that he's on the job and America's on the job when these disasters happen, and they're competent and can take care of you, right? But nothing he does in his presentation would make you think he's competent. I mean, that's just, how it is, right?
Operations and mobile emergency response support teams, 6 of them, to provide communication and logistics support. And on Sunday, when we spoke to the governor, and he asked for the major disaster declaration, we made it available immediately. So so that we could speed federal assistance as quickly as we could to hard-hit communities.
He's going to go to sleep, right? Like he's not there. So here's the big gaffe, and he's just losing. He's falling asleep. His energy level's getting lower and level, and then he just kind of falls apart here.
On the telephone or on the road, an awful lot between California, Idaho, New Orleans, not New Orleans, Louisiana, but in New Orleans.
Yeah, I mean, New Orleans is in Louisiana, Jojo.
Mississippi, and,
Spell Mississippi for us, Jojo.
here, I mean, every part of the country is getting hit.
That's just a few of them. He's talking about climate change here and how the country is getting pummeled because of climate change, and the scientists all agree. I believe that pollutants, what we're doing in terms of, it's different for me than most people in the truth community and Republicans, because I know that pollutants, what human beings are doing, and that also includes Wi-Fi and 5G and these things, are changing the world. But it's not accurately reported by scientists, and certainly not by Jojo Magoo. This is a money-making scam and ways to, shut things down using a, possible real crisis as a, tool to change and, as a power grab for the government and a change to your lifestyle, right? Blaming something that we no longer trust. Most people don't trust them, at least the older generation. The younger generation does. But the older generation, people who are more aware, I mean, about 50% don't trust the government and these agencies because they're just proven liars and they've pulled the football too many times. So this is where Jojo looks confused. He gets confused here.
The members of Congress know from their colleagues in Congress that...
Do you have ever seen a guy who touches his face more than Jojo Magoo? When he used to speak when he wore masks, he was constantly fiddling with the mask. I mean, it's not something they want you to do when they train you to be a public speaker and a politician. He's all over his face, right? He's always touching his face.
The looks like a tornado, they don't call them that anymore, that hit the crops.
What do they call it? What do they call who changed the name of tornadoes and didn't tell me? Or is that something you're just, somebody sent me this morning, right? Let's watch it again. That's wonderful.
Looks like a tornado, they don't call them that anymore, that hit the crops and wetlands in the middle of the country, and Iowa and Nevada, and I mean, it's just across.
Those are two completely different places. Iowa and Nevada. That's I've never been to Iowa, but I kind of get a sense of it. It's farmland there, and Nevada is in the west. I mean, you can get tornadoes in both places, but not the same thing. So this is Nevada, and this is Iowa, quite substantially far away. Like this is a multiple day drive. Like going through all these states takes a day, these big long states, to get to Iowa. And so, yeah, they might possibly were hit by something we used to call tornadoes, but, come on, Jojo. And so my wife was going out for a meeting or something. She came to say goodbye. And I told her about the tornado thing. And she said, I think he means derecho. I mean, I guess that's what he was talking about. Well, derechos have been around for a while. And years ago in our first homestead, our second homestead, and this is about 12 years ago, there was a derecho that hit our farm. And derecho is a wind that's like 100 miles an hour. And my son was, he was sleeping out. So he had a farm. We had a 3-acre farm. And he pitched a tent on pasture, and he was sleeping in a tent for a couple nights. Like my kids used to do that all the time. And the derecho hit, and he had one, a big tent. It was like probably a 6-person tent. We had a couple different tents, and he was inside the tent just holding it up. I was outside when it hit, right? And this powerful wind came out of nowhere, and it lasted, I don't know, maybe a minute, and just blew through. But it's not like anything like a tornado. It's just this powerful wind. And, then we looked it up on the internet. We found out what it was, and it was called the derecho, right? It's just this powerful wind that blows through, and those have been around for a very long time. What is a derecho, and why is it so destructive? So this is, it can be as destructive as a tornado. So this is JoJo's issues. They can have a wind of 240 miles an hour, but it's not the same thing. It's not a new name for a tornado, right?
Looks like a tornado. They don't call them that anymore.
So that's confused JoJo Magoo. So let's move forward here, right? That's that's just a typical day from JoJo Magoo. But how can you look at this guy if you voted for him, or you're a Trump hater or whatever it is, right? And you have every reason to believe that Trump is a bad guy, and you just wanted Trump out of there. How can you be happy with his performance? Like, just grade him on his ability to express himself and inspire confidence. And when you look at him, if you're reading his condition, if you were meeting him for the first time, and he was, you were interviewing him for a high-level administrative position, you would say this guy is clueless. Like, you would joke around afterwards. I interviewed this guy, and he completely lost, right? He started barking at me and saying, "Come on, man." And and then he would get real quiet. He was almost falling asleep. He's not capable of doing a important job. He just isn't there mentally. And he's always been weird. He's never been great. He was never, he never had the potential to be a great president. And now he should be retired. Like, he should be a retired person. He shouldn't be in public office anymore. Again, pulling the football out from under you. So this is the epic part of the video. Like, I'm just getting into the good stuff. I mean, not that the other stuff wasn't good. But this viewer sent me this General Petraeus. He went to BYU, Brigham Young University in Utah, right? I believe it's Utah. It has to be Utah. And he gets asked a real question here. And it's about the CIA and the military, not the CIA, the military, its handling of the poppy fields in Afghanistan. And it is a wonderful moment. Like, I've been waiting for this all day. And I just want to preface this with one thing, which I meant to say in the earlier introduction. That you reach a stage in life over, it could be your business, it could be your, marriage, it could be, any number of things, a relationship, or even ultimately your death, where it's clear that the outcome has already been decided. The outcome is foretold, it's over, it's happening. There's nothing anybody can do about changing it, right? Like when you have cancer, early stage cancer, a lesser cancer, you might be able to get rid of it and fully recover and die of something else. That cancer, you went through something, and in a sense you beat cancer. I don't want to say it like it's some sort of competition. And so you have a chance to change the outcome, right? It might be something like that in a divorce, in a relationship, where you hit a really rough patch and it could lead to divorce. But if you, as a couple, you do, work on your relationship and you change, you're heading towards the cliff and you're able to change the outcome. Like, disaster is looming and you're able to change the outcome. So there are times when you can do work, and you're supposed to do work. It's, your soul, it's part of your soul's plan, and people give up and quit, right? So that's not appropriate, right? There's still a chance, there's still a chance that something can happen differently. And so you have to do it. You have to do the work. Like, there's these countries that are so, these cultures around the world that are so fatalistic, and they have faith in God in a way that's, excuses them from doing the work they need to do to change something. And America's not like that at all. We always think we can change something. We always think we can affect the outcome. And we see movies all the time, TV shows, books, whatever it is, where, it looks like the way that the story and everything's framed, there's no chance. It's over, right? It's predetermined. The outcome is inevitable, right? I am inevitable. Thanos, like the Marvel movies, these epic Marvel movies, the number one franchise of movies in terms of making money and viewership globally. And Thanos saying, I am inevitable, right? That you couldn't prevent this from happening. But they did, and they always do in the movies. And so people in America have this idea, even if things are impossible, you can still change them. And that's not true at all. There's a time where you just have to realize this is going to happen no matter what. The collapse of America is going to happen. Doesn't matter if Trump's president, doesn't matter if Biden's president, doesn't matter if, anybody, Jesus is president, right? There's no changing it. There's no reversing the course that we're on. And certainly none of us could change it, right? Like none of us have the power to stop America from falling off the cliff. It just can't happen. And so when you know that, you can work on something else. All right, what's going to happen afterwards? That's the idea behind Pockets of the Future. The death of America is inevitable, just like our own deaths are inevitable. And you're supposed to, work to stay strong and live your life and, preserve your life when you can. But at some point you just have to accept it. And that's what has to happen here. And ultimately be grateful for it. And so, then you can be at peace with it. The death of America. And yeah, we're 100% on the system, and that sucks, like I always say. But, we can accept the truth and then put our work into something else. And that starts with connecting to God on a deeper level, right? The heartfulness meditation I talk about, a system for such things. Connecting to God internally and have God and our soul guide us in, we still have energy, right? But why throw our energy away, dumping it into something that's going to collapse anyway? Like nothing we can do is going to change it. So we can put our energy into something else. And we should, right? Okay, so without further ado, I want to get to this thing with General Petraeus.
It's regarding the counter-narcotics efforts in Afghanistan specifically. Is the U.S. sending mixed signals to the Afghan population by allowing the opium and poppy production in the Helmand province and specifically in and around Marja to continue? And moreover, is the U.S. military sending mixed signals to Americans back home?
And so this is a real question. Now, this is a college student at Brigham Young University. I assume he's Mormon, maybe even a Republican, right? And, the American military was not only allowing the production of opium in Afghanistan, but was guarding the poppy fields. And this is very important to understand, right? This is not a conspiracy theory, right? These are troops in and around the poppy fields guarding them, right? These guys are like, picking poppies here. I mean, this is mainstream media. The Afghanistan troops and American troops, there's an American there, and these are poppies. This is what produces opium, which produces heroin, right? And so there's no good answer to this. These are the poppies in Afghanistan. This is overwhelmed by opium, the Washington Post. The U.S. war on drugs in Afghanistan has imploded at nearly every turn. How the U.S. military opium war in Afghanistan was lost. It was never lost because they were never trying to stop it. You're going to hear this from Petraeus, right? They weren't ever trying to stop the opium trade. How the heroin trade explains the U.S. failure in Afghanistan. The U.S. turned a blind eye to the opium in Afghan town. So this was mainstream media, that Americans were actually guarding the poppy fields. My brother experienced this in Vietnam. There was this huge opium, infusion of opium and heroin. And it was heroin in the 60s. And then, of course, crack in the 80s, but heroin in the 60s from opium coming from Vietnam. So this has been done before. It was done by the British in China and in India in terms of using opium as a weapon to destroy a country, right? And so this guy asks a real question. Questions journalists should have been asking, right? General Petraeus was considered this hero. They were going to run him for president. And then the war took such an ugly turn in Iraq, right? Betray us. He became Betrayus from Betrayus. But he was, a big hero back then. And the media and journalists, there's no journalists anymore, couldn't ask a question that this college student asked, right? A real legitimate question.
We don't think so. We've thought pretty hard about this. And the fact is that the eradication campaign, which we are not doing at this point in time.
So there's no good answer to this, right? There's no good answer to why the U.S. troops were guarding the poppies in Afghanistan. There's no way to spin this. There's no reason that you would ever allow opium production, right? Encourage it, and then even guard it and help with it, right? There's no reason for the American government, the CIA, to be a part of this. There's nothing he can say here other than deny it and lie about it that would justify the American military position on opium. But he's going to do it anyway.
Is that the eradication campaign, which we are not doing at this point in time, was creating vastly more enemies than any benefits that it accrued.
Creating enemies? We couldn't beat them, so we joined them.
The idea should be not to go after the little guys. What you have to do with the little guys, the farmers in the fields, is provide them an alternate crop. And so indeed what we're going to do is after this particular harvest, we're going to...
After they harvest their opium, is in 2010.
To fund seed, fertilizer, and so forth to grow alternative crops.
So you're subsidizing Afghan farmers. Now think about this. So you really understand how ridiculous this answer. Listen to this effort, because this is a whopper. This is a whopper of an answer. I'll put it back and we'll listen to it again. But he's saying the American government should fund the switching of crops for Afghan farmers. Now, you're going to get in Afghanistan, I don't know, $1 for like a bushel of wheat. I don't know what they can grow out there, right? No matter what it is, it's not as profitable and as easy to grow as poppies and opium, right? Opium can be as much as $200 a gram. I mean, crazy amount of prices. It's way better than oil. It costs less to produce. It grows there naturally. And these farmers know how to grow it. And when you have farmers, any farmer, they don't like to change the way they're doing things. They've been doing it for years, and they know how to do it. And it's expensive because you need different equipment. You need, different skill sets to grow different types of crops. And you need different types of soil and the rest of it. And there's nothing more profitable than opium. And these local farmers, I mean, it's so ridiculous to think that you could get them to switch from opium to something else and make a fraction of what they're making, on a much harder crop to grow that may not even grow there. Like what you just said here is so stupid, right? Like there's no way those farmers would ever give up growing opium, right? and he was going to dump American dollars. This is somewhere where your $2 trillion went into, trying to convince, people to grow something less profitable and harder to grow.
This particular harvest, we're going to fund seed, fertilizer, and so forth to grow alternative crops in that area and in other areas that we've been able to secure. And meanwhile, going after the big guys. This is an industry. This is
going after the big guys. Because the little guys are much harder to tangle with. We don't want to make enemies with. We're making enemies all over the place. We don't want to piss off the little guys. We don't want to piss off the Afghan farmers. We're going to go after the big cartels, even though we're a military, right? We're not the DEA. We're not law enforcement. You know, you're going to go after cartels. Yeah, let's go fight the cartels because they're much easier to fight than local Afghan farmers, right? Can't believe this guy. This is such a, like, there's nothing he could say here. There's nothing he could say to make sense of their position on the opium trade.
Illegal narcotics industry that provides a vast amount of certain elements of the world's illegal narcotics. It's an area
Almost all of them. We'll get into that in just a moment.
where all the countries in the region, by the way, including Iran, but the Central Asian states, Russia, China, all of them, all of us share an interest in combating the illegal narcotics trade and also, of course, extremism.
Okay, so none of those things turned out, right? It doesn't matter if the international community was against it, because this is what actually happened. This is the what happened with Afghanistan. I've showed a different one of these graphs. This is a better one. So this is, the green is what Afghanistan grew in terms of producing opium, right? And the Taliban worked assiduously to get rid of opium, and they got it down to nothing in 2001. And that's when we invaded. So that's wicked suspect, right? It seems like this is maybe the major reason, at least one of the reasons we invaded, because the opium production was very high, and America has used opium. I mean, not just in terms of Americans, but the American government, the CIA, has used it to fund things and to destabilize countries, getting people addicted to opium. And then it spiked as soon as we got there. Americans got there. But then it really took off here in 2007. That's when the opium production was at, really an all-time high here. From the this is Americans watching over. Here's when General Petraeus gave this speech, and he said, all right, we're not going to try to stop them growing opium anymore. We're embracing it. And then it just continued to spike, right, in 2010. So if you look at America's use of 3 waves of the rise of opioid overdoses, right? And so there was 100,000 opioid overdoses. And right here is 2010 when Petraeus gave this talk. And you can see any kind of opioid, it just spikes. This is the opioid crisis that happened from here, right? And it just started to take off. And so that opium that was being produced in Afghanistan here is taking off in America here. We know where a lot of this opium ended up, right? In America, because the opioid crisis, it killed like 100,000 people. And then there was all the, the losses and the tragedy. I mean, it's more than just that, right? And so, all these addicted people. We know what the opioid crisis did. It's, considered the crime of the century by the HBO documentary by that name. So we know what happened here. And so this guy is giving this speech, and, it's going to get worse because of their policies. American military and the CIA are facilitating the export of opium to America because there's planes going back and forth from Afghanistan. And that seems to be the real reason we are there. Certainly it's one of the reasons.
By and large. So that's the approach that we're going to take, is not to, again, penalize the farmer right now. It is to help them plan for the fall planting season, which will be on us in about a month and a half or so. They'll start getting ready for that.
And they're going to grow opium, and you're going to facilitate the growth and production.
And meanwhile, going after the big guys rather than denying, taking away the little guys' fruits of his labor, if you will.
It's always better going like this. You're not a law enforcement agency. You're not going after the cartels. As the big guys, the CIA, you're going to get rid of the CIA because the CIA is, the one that's responsible for the opium coming to America.
And so that's the approach. And we think it makes a great deal more sense, frankly, than the eradication programs that were being carried out before, which also, unfortunately, had become corrupt in certain ways. And that's a big challenge, needless to say, in Afghanistan is one of our efforts has to be to help the Afghans achieve legitimacy in the eyes of the people for their governance. And
okay, and how'd that work out? Like just in 2021, in hindsight, Petraeus, how did that all work out? He's a 4-star general, guys. 4 stars, all these medals of valor and things here, right? He's a well-decorated general, and he's saying to this kid, yeah, we have to let the farmers grow opium there, you know, and that's never going to be a good answer. We know what happened. We know what happened with the opioid crisis in America. We know what ended up happening in Afghanistan, and now maybe the Taliban's back in power. Unless this was part of the deal, you know, they're going to stop the opium production there. But maybe they've, you know, made some sort of economic deal or something with the U.S. not to do that. And of course, Johnson & Johnson, if you saw that documentary on HBO, Johnson & Johnson, you know, the drug company, has developed a higher strength poppy that they're growing in Tasmania. You know, Tasmania's near Australia, and they're producing a lot of the opium there now. So, you know, who's to say what this is, how this is going to play out? But we know about all these things. We know what opium and heroin does to people. We know how it's destroyed countries, destroyed people's lives. We know, you know, how this is played out with the CIA. There's this guy, Gary Webb, right? And there's multiple stories, CIA, Contras gangs, and crack. There was a story called Kill the Messenger, a movie called Kill the Messenger, which is actually pretty hard to find, but it's well worth watching. And they talk about how the CIA destroyed Gary Webb's life, right? Cocaine conspiracy theories in the CIA in Central America. This is resurrecting a disgraced reporter. And so the CIA, when he filed these reports about how the CIA was responsible for the opium heroin crisis. Now, this is back in Reagan days, right? It was, you know, this stuff that happened with Iran-Contra and all this stuff, Reagan, and then stuff to do with Clinton. And the CIA went after this guy and destroyed his life, right? Fired him and, you know, for reporting the truth. Back to what I was saying in the last 3 videos, how they crucify people who tell the truth. I mean, think about that. That truth is a threat to the government. And the CIA is, you know, again, they have to fund their mission, and they don't want congressional oversight. They want money to fund their missions that it's off the books. That's illegal. And we know they've done that in a couple of places. We know they did it in Vietnam. I mean, I know that personally because my brother said there was CIA there guarding the fields. You know, they were guarding the fields, opium fields, in Vietnam. So we know that played out. There's a movie about this with Denzel Washington called American Gangster, and he was getting his opium, based in a true story from Vietnam, right? Based on a year-long investigation, reporter Gary Webb wrote that during the 1980s, the CIA helped finance its covert war against Nicaraguans' leftist government through sales of cut-rate cocaine to Central LA dealer Ricky Ross. How drug dealers use the U.S. military to smuggle heroin. So this is in the 60s, this guy Frank Lucas, who was played by Denzel Washington, and that on military planes he had this opium called Blue Magic, and he got them smuggled in on coffins. And so they were false bottom coffins, and that took, you know, he couldn't just do that on his own. That had to be coordinated with like the CIA and the military. And so dead soldiers were laying on a bed of opium, right? Think about that, Vietnam soldiers. For centuries, war and opium have been intertwined in Asia, sometimes assisted by the U.S., always assisted by the U.S., including Vietnam. Then there was this guy, Barry Seal, played by Tom Cruise, and he was smuggling various types of drugs. It was mostly cocaine from South America. This was also about the Gary Webb thing, and he was protected by the CIA. You can watch those movies, and he was eventually murdered, right? So this is, you know, I mean, this is a good movie, and so is the Gary Webb one, documenting the CIA, which we now know has used drug trafficking, drug running, as a way to fund their operations. And, you know, that means Americans who are dying here from drug use and their lives are being ruined by drug use, the CIA thinks that it's worth it for them to run their operations. Well, in other countries, right? To fund their operations they don't want the government to know about. They're willing to put Americans' lives at risk and addict Americans to opium. I mean, think about that. Like, what could be possibly going on with their operations that it's worth the opioid crisis in America? Like, I mean, this is, one of the worst things, opium. Destroys lives, right? We know what happens when it's used. All these things are known, and yet they're doing it anyway, and this guy's defending it.
And that has not been the case in many areas because of predatory practices and corruption. President Karzai is keenly aware of that. He is working to combat it, but it is a very, very tough conundrum for him.
Yeah, so why doesn't he just take off at the first sign of, when the Americans leave, he should just leave too. So we know how this plays out, right? Okay, so while I was out, me and my son were out putting barbed wire on our fence, a different fence. I got a couple comments to get to. I'm not going to do it today, but it's going to tie into that. But anyways, we were doing some outdoor work, and JoJo gave another press conference, and I'm probably going to cover that tomorrow. It's hilarious. But anyways, let me read this meme. If you ever feel useless, remember it took 20 years, trillions of dollars, and 4 U.S. presidents to replace the Taliban with the Taliban. Just an absolute spectacular meme that somebody sent me, and now that ties in with everything else here as well. So for this next segment, I want to do a little bit of a preface because of the kind of issue that it brings up and the kind of people it'll attract to my channel, right? And people putting words in my mouth about taking what I'm about to say and running with it and saying things that I didn't say and putting out intentions that I didn't put out there. And so the first thing to know is I don't have a demographic. Like, I don't think of myself in terms of demographics. There's people I get along with or like or admire or feel some sort of, connection to, but I'm not in some group, right? It's not based in some group mentality. I don't fit in with groups. I mean, the group I would most identify with and most fit in with is other people who do heartfulness meditation. And there's some wonderful saint-like people. I mean, there's a handful of like saints in the heartfulness system that I know or know about, right? Just wonderful people. But those people are usually in the background. Of course, there's the master of the system, somebody who's merged into God. But there's just these wonderful, nice people. And those people, I admire and I look up to them. And they're just really nice people. But I'm not really like that, right? I'm not, one of those people. Those people are, on a different kind of level. And so there's wonderful people in the heartfulness system. There are some people who aren't so great. But it's not like some group that has a belief system. It's not supposed to be political in any way, shape, or form. The heartfulness system isn't about changing the world through politics, changing the world through any number of things like charity or whatever. They feed the poor just because there's, some wealthy people in the system. There's some free clinics and hospitals that are at ashrams for people to come. In India, they have some things, some charitable type of situations, but charity really isn't a part of the system. And it's not about feeding the poor or picking people up from the lower levels of society, right? Those things you're supposed to do anyway. Like, it's basically said you're supposed to take care of other people. You're supposed to be, generous or whatever. You're supposed to be giving just as a natural spiritual person. But that's something for you to do. The organization does some things if there's, some sort of crisis, maybe some money's given or some volunteer type situation. In the flood in Chennai, they were feeding people. I mean, my one of my neighbors who didn't do the heartfulness system, who I became really close to, and there was a young family, a young couple that I really bonded with. This young couple, they had a 3-year-old kid, and my family and I interacted with them during the flood, and we became quite close. I talked about them and the story of their dog Bucky. I talked about that. And then across the way from us, there was there was an older couple that both of them were eye doctors, and they had an eye doctor, an optometry clinic, and they were just really nice people. We bonded during the flood and after the flood. We became close. And the husband of the couple, he came up, we were looking at the roof, and the flood was still going on, and he said to me, the heartfulness, and he didn't do the heartfulness system. He said the heartfulness at one of these apartment buildings, they're feeding people. They're just, he said, I can't believe how organized they are and how much food they're able to produce. He was very impressed with the effort. But that's not what the heartfulness system's about. And I'm coming around to, I'm starting here, but I'm coming around to this essential point about Zionism and what this guy says, this professor, it says in testifying to Congress, and it's kind of shocking, but I needed to preface this with this other piece. The heartfulness system's about bringing people who are, have spiritual aspirations, who have maybe past lives or they come from a higher region. There's lots of higher developed souls that came down to earth and they were doing God's work and they had some sort of spiritual fall and they've been stuck here on planet Earth. And there's people who, have had past lives of where they developed a craving and a desire and a need to connect with God on a high level. And then there's people now who are waking up and have this internal desire. But it's for higher level people. It's like trickle down spirituality. It's not by going to the lowest of the low and trying to pull those people up. It's about pulling the people up who are already striving to connect to God on a higher level. Even if they don't know it consciously, on a soul level, they have some, spiritual capital. There was this story where Babaji made one person a preceptor, a trainer, which gives a person the ability to transmit and to clean people on an internal level. And so Babaji found out the guy went and found a bunch of lepers, like 15 lepers, a dozen lepers, and started transmitting to them, trying to cure them, which is not what the transmission, the transmission is God's love and it's for your soul. It's food for your soul. And some of you have experienced it, and it helps a person connect to God. And Babaji's like, what are you doing? Babaji's very gentle with people, And the guy said, no, I want to cure these lepers. If you help me cure these lepers, everyone will want to start your system. And Babaji said, yeah, I don't want that. Like this. This isn't about bringing people in through miracles. It's about, the transmissions to elevate people and connect them to God and accept and be grateful for your circumstances. There's a reason you're experiencing something. There's a reason that your life is, whatever way it is. God, your soul, and your destiny, your plan, your pre-plan, your pre-spiritual treatment plan, your path in life was already set before you were born. And so the heartfulness system helps you navigate and be grateful for that. It doesn't, miracle your way into happiness and wealth, and it's not about materiality at all, right? There was this other story where Master Charji was Babaji's disciple, and they went to Europe. And they were in some European country, and back in those days, there would be a handful of people in every country, Europe, and, some of the other people would come from other European countries, but maybe it was 100 or 200 people. Now it would be thousands. But back in Babaji's day, it was not so many. And so this woman heard that there was a spiritual guy there from India, and she had a husband who had gone crazy. And, maybe they were in Poland, or I don't know exactly where they were, one of those sort of countries. And she brings the guy over to see Babaji. And Babaji spends all night reworking the guy's brain, right? And, the guy's like cured. He's no longer crazy. And they go away and they never come back. Like, they just got what they wanted and they didn't, say, hey, maybe there's something to this. And Babaji had to, was tired the next day. Plus when he traveled, he was older. He's in his 70s when this happened. And he had already had a lot of health issues. And, Charji, who was, sort of like Babaji's bodyguard almost in a way. And he almost like a bouncer to keep people away from sucking his energy and, doing stuff like this. He was saying, come on, you guys, you can't, he's not here to cure people or to treat people's insanity. He's here to, for his purpose, which is to promote, and give people this transmission and cleaning for people who can aspire to do such things, right? Who can aspire to their own, to become like him, right? To be, become a person that merges in the source. And I'm saying that because it's a universal system, heartfulness. And there's no, boundaries of nation. It's to serve anybody who wants to come. But it's not to cure the world or make people happy or make people healthy. It's to help them connect to God. And everybody is your brother and sister when you do the heartfulness system. You might not like people, and of course that's going to happen. Like lots of people don't like their brothers and sisters anyway, right? We don't get along with our families, but we're all considered brothers and sisters. There's no countries or ethnicities in terms of people who do heartfulness. There's no religions. There's no, you're just a person that practices heartfulness. That's how you are considered. I mean, you go see the master of the system, they often wouldn't ask, like what you did for work or, they didn't care about those things, right? What political party or who you voted for. I mean, those things are of no concern. In the heartfulness system, you're supposed to obey the laws and, be good citizens in your country. But in terms of, my understanding of it or how I feel about it, my allegiance is to God, right? My allegiance isn't to a government. I don't pledge my allegiance to a flag. I'm not a patriot, right? I will do what God wants me to do here, right? And I'll go along with the rules. I'm not, there's no revolutionary attitude either. It's not about overthrowing or exposing the lies. That's what I was saying about the heartfulness system isn't about being a truther either, at least in terms of, the way that people are truthers now, right? It's something where you will have a spiritual goal, and there's a reason why you were born in a certain country, right? There's a reason why I was born in America, and I'm American, by, definition, but I'm not, like it's just the place I live, right? And for this idea of universal brotherhood in the heartfulness system, that we're all part of a family, and that includes animals and, all life forms are connected through the central, the central truth that we're all created by God, right? That's why I don't talk about specific groups. I don't feel comfortable doing so. It isn't a good reflection on the heartfulness system. There's lots of ways that people like to talk about or blame certain groups based in their ethnicity, based in their race, right? Based in, all of those things. Of course, there's very strict rules on YouTube about doing such things. And there are certain groups that take a lot of blame, and Jewish people are one of them. And, there's so many people in the truth community that just want to blame Jews for everything, right? That's their go-to. There's lots of people, I think mostly white Christians, who, they've said to me or left comments here that, it's not the English's fault or the Queen's fault or, white Christians' fault. They've been tricked by the Jews to take slaves or any number of things that they're saying the Jews have tricked them or, manipulated them into doing bad things. And again, the heartfulness system is about personal responsibility. It's not about blaming one group, even the people I call the so-called controllers, which is a very generic term, whoever that might be in terms of their ethnic makeup, right? And I've said things about Israel and Mossad and, some of my earlier videos, and there's things that I've said and some videos that no longer exist for various reasons. But when I did post those videos, there were people that immediately started showing up that were like, to me, hate mongers, right? And I've talked about hate in terms of the heartfulness system, that hate is your hate. If you have hatred inside of you, just like if you have anger or you have love or you have fear or you have compassion, those are yours. Those are your qualities. And whatever you're hateful towards or angry at or fearful of, that's an object of your hate that's inside of you that's triggering your condition. And so I didn't like having those, I don't like having hateful people. Anybody who's talking like any sort of hateful stuff is an auto ban for lots of reasons. One, it's just, I don't like it. And two, it's not being honest. It's not being a truther. And three, it causes all kinds of problems, right? It causes victim consciousness. And you see the way this is being used as a weapon, all these groups, all these demographics claiming to be victims, and social media and the mainstream media and Hollywood are backing these groups. And so every time you express negativity or even some sort of hateful speech towards these groups, it backfires on you, right? I mean, I've often wondered how many of these people are just plants from these groups that come in and, say these types of things so they can generate victim consciousness. So it's not the winning strategy, and I want no part of it. And I don't, I discourage it, right? And so the problem is when you talk in, sort of blanket statements about people, like I have Jewish friends, some of my old basketball buddies, one of my friends, he and I started a basketball team together. And he grew up in my hometown, but he went to the opposite high school. There are two high schools in my hometown. I moved away before high school, but we played basketball in the same park, and we knew each other from college. And we had a intramural team, and we formed a team in a competitive YMCA league. And he's one of the few people from my basketball days that contacts me. He's got a couple of kids. And he's a fireman. He's been a fireman for a number of years. And he's a good guy. And he's like, of all my old friends, he's the only one that tries to keep in contact with me. And even in college, he's a good guy. We used to go over his grandparents' house. They were nice people. He used to take care of them. And the guy that gave me my initial sittings, the trainer, the preceptor, was a, old Jewish hippie. And he wasn't, in a sense, Jewish anymore because he was doing heartfulness. He didn't follow his religion. He transcended his religion. Just like, I transcended my religion. I used to be Catholic, and now I am, I do the heartfulness system, right? I'm a spiritual person. Just like Jesus was a Jewish person, and he became something else, right? He transcended his religion. He graduated into the world of spirituality, where religions are middleman between you and God. Spirituality is where you have a direct connection to God, and that's what the heartfulness system facilitates, right? And I had other Jewish friends, people that I grew up with, and none of those people were bad people. They weren't part of the controlling group. And so, this element of the truth community is always, I just don't like it, right? Because it's fundamentally dishonest, and it targets a whole group of people that many of them have nothing to do with the accusations and hate that's there from, certain members of the truth community. And, there's a video up on YouTube. I don't know if it's there anymore, but the person accused me of being Jewish because I was critical of, pedo priests, because, partly because I was, once Catholic. My family was Catholic. And he accused me of being Jewish, right? It happened a number of times in comments. There was this element, of people doing that when I'm not, right? I grew up Catholic. All four grandparents, my grandparents were Catholic, and now I do heartfulness. So I'm not, the religion that I grew up with is nothing to me now. Like, clearly I do heartfulness, right? I think everybody who knows me, who watches my videos, knows this. So I'm just saying that because I'm about to criticize. These guys say something that's, almost on the level or maybe on the level of what Petraeus was saying. That's just so ridiculous that, I'm not attacking them for their faith or their beliefs, but the deal they're trying to cut themselves. You listen to this guy. And so again, this isn't me joining your club. I don't want any of this sort of hate on my channel, right? About, any particular group of people. I've made it clear, doesn't serve anybody. And it's, it's contrary to what I do in terms of the heartfulness system. But what this guy is about to say, let's get into the video, okay? This is a long enough introduction.
Thank you for your question. I think we always have to pay attention to context when we're looking at any particular one incident, and we need to investigate it carefully. When we think about the State Department definition, which seeks to codify what anti-Semitism is, it's such a flawed definition that it can virtually encompass any particular act without any real regard for context, although it pretends that it does. For example, the State Department definition claims that stating that a particular Jewish person has more loyalty to the state of Israel than they do to their own country is necessarily an example of anti-Semitism, where the truth is that that's one of the fundamental premises of Zionism. And if you go back and look at the statements, say, of Theodor Herzl, who's wrote really what's considered the founding text of Zionism, he argued very clearly that Jews are one people, and therefore it's useless for them to be patriots to the countries in which they reside. So there's times when a statement like that is contained in the definition of the State Department would actually undermine the founding premises of Zionism itself.
So what he just said was that if you are a true Jewish person, at least by his definition, then your loyalty is only to Israel, right? It isn't to your current country. So if you're a citizen of America and you're a Jewish person, your loyalty is to Israel. And if you have a powerful position, like if you're president, you're president's advisor, there's many Jewish president advisors, then your true loyalty is to Israel. And, think about that, right? Think about what he's saying. So the title of this video said this is the ADL, and it's not. This guy is a professor. I found the C-SPAN version of this. This guy is Barry Trachtenberg, right? He's a Wake Forest Jewish history chair. So at the Wake Forest University, which I believe is in North Carolina, has a Jewish history chair. And this is the Department of History. This is Barry Trachtenberg. I'm a historian of modern European and American Jewry, teaching classes on Nazi Holocaust and Jewish responses to it, as well as classes on the history of Zionism, American Jewry, and other topics related to modern Jewish past. I'm happy to work with students interested in any of these subjects and more. And so again, he's a person who has a powerful position at a university, and he just said that any Jewish person has only one loyalty, and that loyalty is to Israel. There's a board of people here, and they're testifying in front of Congress. And the majority of the people on the board are also Jewish, and their testimony is about anti-Semitism on the college campus, but this guy, Trachtenberg, is saying it's just the opposite.
While depictions of rampant anti-Semitism are widely reported in the press, they do not represent the actual experiences of Jewish students at the campus level. They discovered that campus life is neither threatening nor alarmist. In general, students reported feeling comfortable on their campuses, and more specifically, feeling comfortable as Jews on their campuses. Much of the testimony you'll hear today is likely to argue that anti-Semitism is at crisis levels. I urge you to be skeptical of such claims. First, many of the stories that get wide circulation contain factual distortions and are misrepresented in the media. Second, many studies are based on a definition that defines criticism of Israel as inherently anti-Semitic. Rather, students who engage in speech that's critical of Israeli policy are largely motivated by their concern for Palestinian human rights. They are not motivated by anti-Semitic speech, but its opposite, a desire to end racial and religious discrimination of all kinds. It is profoundly difficult to create a definition of anti-Semitism for legislative purposes.
So he has a contrary opinion about what these other guys are saying, these other Jewish people are saying about needing stronger laws condemning anti-Semitism on college campuses.
Political and economic order. In each of those moments, Jews were imagined as a united group that possessed power and authority far beyond their actual numbers. Yet in 1948, with the founding of Israel as a solution to anti-Semitism, the situation changed dramatically. For the first time, a significant number of Jews gained actual and not imaginary power. Today, the state of Israel has borders, police, courts, a military, a nuclear arsenal, political parties, a mostly representative and somewhat democratic system of government. Like all other states, its actions must be permitted to be a matter of public debate and discourse, both within the Jewish community and outside of it. Yet speech that's critical of Israel still strikes many as inherently anti-Semitic. The problem is we are still learning how to talk about Israel's actual political power in ways that do not immediately echo much older and anti-Semitic depictions of imaginary Jewish power. This is not only on account of the long history of anti-Jewish hatred in the West, it is also because, as we see in a legislative initiative such as these, to characterize any speech that's critical of Israel as intrinsically anti-Semitic has been a highly effective tool employed by those who uncritically support every action of Israel and seek to stigmatize all critics.
So this is a very important statement, right? I mean, everything that he's saying here, because it flies in the face of this whole hearing, that they want stronger laws and I don't know, whatever. I mean, there's a lot of laws already about people who, anybody who criticizes anything to do with Israel is considered anti-Semitic, and a person who is, pushing hate, right? Here's the question that he answers with the part I played you earlier from the YouTube video.
Do you or any of the other panelists, for that matter, disagree with that? That is, can't and don't all forms of hatred change with the circumstances and the times?
Thank you for your question. I think we always have to pay attention to context when we're looking at any particular one incident, and we need to investigate it carefully. When we think about the State Department definition, which seeks to codify what anti-Semitism is, it's such a flawed definition that it can virtually encompass any particular act without any real regard for context, although it pretends that it does. For example, the State Department definition claims that stating that a particular Jewish person has more loyalty to the state of Israel than they do to their own country is necessarily an example of anti-Semitism.
And so you have a law in the books where if you say that a Jewish person who has a position of power, or is just a Jewish person in America, and you say that what he's about to say here,
where the truth is that that's one of the fundamental premises of Zionism. And if you go back and look at the statement, say, of Theodor Herzl, who wrote really what's considered the founding text of Zionism, he argued very clearly that Jews are one people, and therefore it's useless for them to be patriots to the countries in which they reside.
And so this is a big thing. It's useless for them to be patriots to the countries that they reside, which is America. And again, I preface this by saying my loyalty is to God. I'm not loyal to the American system. But if your loyalty is to Israel and Zionism over America, there's going to be a time where America's interests and Israel's interests are two different things, right? Even though everyone says that there's a great friendship or partnership there, Israel has its interests and America has its interests, right, as a political person. And so if you are loyal to another country, which he says all Jewish people should be, and there's many people, like I said, my friends who, haven't been to a synagogue since they were a kid, right, who are, Jewish by their, upbringing, but they're not practicing. And there's lots of Jewish people, just like there's lots of Christians or lots of Hindus or any religion who don't, follow the letter of the law. But what he's saying here is,
in text of Zionism, he argued very clearly that Jews are one people, and therefore it's useless for them to be patriots to the countries in which they reside.
And just to clarify this, I'm in the editing process, so I want to make sure this is crystal clear, because this is a really important point. This guy is a Jewish scholar. He's an academic. He teaches Judaism at a university, and he's prominent enough to sit in front of the Senate. And he has a contrary position to these other members, there's a guy from the ADL and some other people here. But what he's saying is that there's a law on the books, law against anti-Semitism, that says if a non-Jewish person who's an American accuses Jewish people of not being loyal, especially the people I'm going to show you, because these are heavy hitters, Jewish Americans that are, very prominent people with a lot of power. And if somebody says, well, your religion teaches that you can't be loyal to America, you have to choose to be loyal to Israel and Zionism first, right? And if you say that, you're considered an anti-Semite and you are, breaking that law, whatever it is, right? And this guy is a scholar, again, quoting another famous scholar, saying that, well, that's actually true. That if you follow the teachings of Judaism, you're all one people and you belong to the state of Israel. And therefore you can't be a patriot to the country of your, wherever you live now. So if you're an American, your loyalty is to Israel. Like he's saying that. I'm not saying it. But if somebody outside their religion says it, you are accused of being an anti-Semite. and legally based in this law that he's talking about. So just think about that. That's an important point that he's saying this, right? And what I was saying in the preface to this part of the video is that when you identify as a demographic, if you identify based in your race, based in your culture, based in your religion, it creates an us against them, right? It's a very, fundamental part of the system. In fact, the trainer who started me years ago before I started, he gave a talk in which he said that he realized through the heartfulness system that even having, in a sense, friends was like disincluding other people, right? And another practitioner of the heartfulness system followed up and said something similar, and people were pissed. And then Master Chargy got up and said, yeah, we're supposed to be a brotherhood. Of course, you're going to like some people more than others, but groups of friends, groups of, subgroups always create animosity and hostility, and that's what's happening right now in our country. So what this guy is saying here, in terms of people with power who are Jewish, they have a loyalty to Israel, many of them, which is, he's doing everybody a great service, because if you say that, like he's saying, if you say that by law, that's something that is considered anti-Semitic. So let's, understand it. Based on what this college professor just said, somebody who studies Zionism, if what he's saying is true, somebody like Michael Chertoff, who was the former head of the NSA, right? And he is also a dual citizen. It says, it is evident that whether one is a Democrat or Republican, Michael Chertoff could be regarded by both parties and all Americans as an outstanding citizen. He has the additional merit of being an observant Jew who is also a dual citizen of the United States and Israel. So this guy was in charge of Homeland Security for America, but he was also a dual citizen. And he was the guy that pushed those body scanners at the airport. Now he has a company that deals with various types of global strategies for risk identification and analysis and mitigation. And he has, he has interests in the companies that, one company that makes the body scanners that are now at every airport in America. So if what this professor said is true, this guy, Michael Chertoff seeks full body scanners at airports. This guy, Michael Chertoff, who was in charge of national security for years, was somebody who was a dual citizen, right, with Israel, and his loyalties lie with Israel. This professor said, based in the definition of what it is to be a Jewish person, your loyalties, you can't be a patriot because your loyalties are always to Israel. And so if there was an issue where Israel was in conflict with America, you have people who are advisors. You had Barack Obama had a couple of his key advisors were Jewish people, as were multiple people under the Bush administration and the Obama administration, right? And so there's this guy. He was the producer of Fight Club. He made a number of other movies. His name is Arnon Milchan, and he admitted that he helped Israel spy on America. He's somebody who now has basically gone back and is living in Israel, and he was bragging about in Israel that as a Hollywood producer, he was gathering American secrets and was spying on, important people because of his position as a Hollywood producer, and his interests lied with Israel. His loyalties weren't with America, where he was making his money and he was, making movies. He also did, he was a real-life James Bond, talks about how he helped Israel alleged nuclear bomb program. And so he's somebody that's claiming that he stole American secrets about nuclear technology and gave them to Israel. And so again, this is a person whose loyalties, as the professor said earlier, are really to another country. And like I said before, I'm not a patriot. I don't get all riled up about this stuff. But when you have people in powerful positions that are loyalty, their first loyalty is to another country, right? Especially if it has to do with national security. Or what about economics? Is this true about Alan Greenspan? Does Alan Greenspan, there's a number of, his successor, Ben Bernanke, was also a person who was Jewish. And you have a number of like these powerful people in terms of bankers, and they're the head of various, large corporations, American corporations. But this guy was in charge of the Federal Reserve, which is a private bank that's in charge of our money. And if his loyalties were to Israel, along with his wife, who is a reporter on MSNBC, so if Greenspan was of Romanian Jewish descent, his mother Rose Goldsmith. He's married to Andrea Mitchell, who's also Jewish, who is an influential reporter at MSNBC. And if their loyalties are to Israel, well, that's something, right? I mean, that's something that everyone should be aware of because they hold very powerful positions. Like this guy getting a Medal of Honor from George W. Bush. And if he was more loyal to Israel than America, and there was a conflict between those two countries, then that's a real problem, right? People have a right to criticize this because these guys hold very powerful positions. Because stuff like this happened, the U.S. Liberty was bombed by Israel. So there was a 6-day war, and America wanted to know if Egypt had attacked Israel first, right? Because that was the story Israel was presenting. So America sent a communication vessel to monitor what was going on in terms of communication in this war. And they were bombed, and it turned out they were bombed by Israel. They were hit by a torpedo, and they tried to sink the ship, right? But the ship wouldn't sink, and there was many people lost their lives, right? 34 Americans were killed, 174 were injured. And then Israel came and said, "You guys need any help?" And the guys were giving them the finger. And then what transpired afterwards, when it first was indicated that this boat was being attacked and they didn't know by who, Lyndon Johnson scrambled all the jets, and they were going to bomb the crap out of Egypt, who they thought was responsible for bombing the boat. But then when he found out it was Israel, he called back all the jets because, this was, he was, scared of what happened because of whatever reason, right? He lost his nerve. I mean, a country just bombed an American vessel, and America didn't retaliate. And one of his key advisors was Jewish, right? Somebody who was loyal to Israel and was leaking information back to Israel. Israel ended up giving America $6 million as a settlement for this thing. But clearly, this was an act of war, right? Many people are very, very upset about this still. And lots of the players who were involved in Lyndon Johnson's administration and the media were on Israel's side, even though they were American citizens. And so this creates a real problem. And then you have Cynthia McKinney. Before I get to Cynthia McKinney, it's late here. I was doing a lot of farm work today, and beautiful day. And this is a long video. I'm not going to finish today. Probably be up tomorrow morning. But anyways, I left some stuff out. I want to say it before we move to Cynthia McKinney, because there's other powerful players that I left out, so many of them. But you look at Donald Trump's main man when he was president was his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, who, of course, is Jewish. And then you have Chuck Schumer, who is the top senator in in Congress, in the Senate. And so if you think about all the powerful positions out there, and if they are following Judaism the way this professor said that all Jews should, right? This is their teaching. This is their core principles, right? So when they say that they're Jewish, it's their core principle that they can only be loyal to Israel, no matter what powerful position they hold in any country. Their homeland and their identifying group is loyal to this one country. And we can verify that because these groups, these powerful lobbying groups for Israel, make these senators, make these these Congress people, these politicians, sign a pledge of loyalty to Israel, and they're not even Jewish, right? Cynthia McKinney exposed this, and among other politicians. And so let's get into her story, who published this little excerpt, right? And she has been accused of anti-Semitism. She was one of the rare people. She went after Donald Rumsfeld for, well, this is what she said here.
Mr. Secretary, according to the Comptroller General of the United States, there are serious financial management problems at the Pentagon, to which Mr. Cooper alluded. Fiscal year 1999, 2.3 trillion missing. Fiscal year 2000, 1.1 trillion missing. Mr. Secretary, according to the Comptroller General of the United States, there are serious financial management problems at the Pentagon, to which Mr. Cooper alluded. Fiscal year 1999, 2.3 trillion missing. Fiscal year 2000, 1.1 trillion missing. And DOD is the number one reason why the government can't balance its checkbook. The Pentagon has claimed year after year that the reason it can't account for the money is because its computers don't communicate with each other.
So the Pentagon has lost trillions of dollars, and we just saw this happen in the war in Afghanistan, where they came out and said, you know, Biden said that they're missing $1 trillion. That everyone says it only costs $1 trillion, but he said it costs $2 trillion, and other people are saying $2.4 trillion. And so this is even before some of those wars, and she's confronting Rumsfeld on all this money being lost.
My second question, Mr. Secretary, is who has the contracts today to make those systems communicate with each other? How long have they had those contracts? And how much have the taxpayers paid for them? Finally, Mr. Secretary, after the last hearing, I thought that my office was promised a written response to my question regarding the 4 war games on September 11th. I have not yet received that response.
And so she asked him a lot of various questions here.
But would like for you to respond to the questions that I've put to you today, and then I do expect the written response to my previous question, hopefully by the end of the week.
Thank you, Representative. I've forgotten what the second question was.
I think Ms. Jonas knows it.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. McKinney. I appreciate the question. I appreciate your interest in our department's financial condition, and we are working very hard on that program. I've just come back recently.
Working very hard on. We've lost some trillions of dollars, but we're trying to get everything coordinated. All right, so that's Cynthia McKinney. Something else about Cynthia McKinney.
Because I did not toe the line on U.S. policy for Israel.
What line is that they wanted? Were you told directly that you had to toe a line, or explain that to me?
Well, every candidate for Congress at that time had a pledge. They were given a pledge to sign. And I was new on the scene. And so the pledge had Jerusalem as the capital city, the military superiority of Israel.
American Congress people have to sign this pledge.
Yes, you sign the pledge. If you don't sign the pledge, you don't get money. So, for example, it was almost like water torture for me. My parents observed this. I would get a call, and the person on the other end of the phone would say, I want to do a fundraiser for you. And then we would get into the planning. I would get really excited because, of course, you have to have money in order to run a campaign. And then 2 weeks, 3 weeks into the planning, they would say, did you sign the pledge? And then I would say, no, I didn't sign the pledge. And then my fundraiser would go kaput.
So I've known this for a while. I might have covered this years and years ago. But now we have confirmation from a scholar, an academic scholar, professor, who is obviously, has all this knowledge about the history of Judaism and the teachings, and he's quoting other scholars, and he's saying, well, in terms of being Jewish, you really can't be loyal to any other country. And then you tie this into these powerful lobbying groups making non-Jewish politicians, I mean, not making them, but holding money and influence, right, and getting their blessing over them, that they have to sign a pledge to basically be loyal to Israel over their own country, right? And so, of course, people are upset by this. Of course, Americans, people are very patriotic, don't want their powerful politicians and people in the movie industry and the banking industry. And Janet Yellen is also Jewish. So you had Ben Bernanke, you had Alan Greenspan, and now Janet Yellen, who are all in charge of maybe the most powerful financial institution in the world, the Federal Reserve, that's in charge of America's money supply. And these people are possibly, if they're following their religion correctly, more loyal to Israel. And so think about what's being said here, because this is kind of stunning.
I made it public. This probably nobody had said anything about it, but I made it public. And then, the excuse was, well, those were just overzealous advocates for Israel. So then the tactic changed. And but this is what is done for 535 members of the United States Congress. 100 senators, 435 members of the House of Representatives have to now write a paragraph, which basically says the same thing. So it's not a pledge, but it's a paragraph, and you post it, and, there are these forums you have to go to at the synagogues or whatever. And then, if you don't perform appropriately, then you don't get money to run your campaign. The problem is that it requires an awful lot of money to run a campaign. And whether it's a woman's organization, an environmental organization, people can read about this on the internet if they're interested. If you go to thomas.loc.
So she also talked about, I don't know if it's in this interview, but she talked about how when she didn't sign the pledge, the Israel lobby dumped in a fortune to her opponent, and her opponent took her seat, right? And so, that happened. At least that's what she says happened. And then this is how they treated her. In her talking about it, the ADL has said Cynthia McKinney's anti-Israel campaign. And so she is just saying these things that this person, this professor has said are true, right? That, there are people in America who have either dual citizenships or positions of power and the influence of various lobbyists that are promoting Israel above the interests of America. That if there's a choice between America and Israel, they are patriots of Israel, right? And Cynthia McKinney is being charged with being anti-Semitic. Former Democratic Congresswoman Cynthia McKinney flirts with Holocaust deniers. Cynthia McKinney blasts U.S. on Libya TV and pro-Israel groups in Iran. Twitter's anti-Semitic problem and the saga of the McKinney tweet. Why are Georgia roads honoring anti-Semites? Cynthia McKinney Parkway, and this is the Jewish Times of Atlanta. So I'm going to wrap this up. This is a long video. But Cynthia McKinney, if you listen to or believe her story, the way that she says it, that she was approached by pro-Israeli lobby. And they told her that she needed to sign a pledge, which has been verified by many sources. And then when she didn't sign the pledge, they attacked her, right? They got her out of her seat. And she's talked about this for a number of years and has been backed by evidence. And this professor who, says that this is the sort of fundamental heart of Zionism, that you have to take an attitude of being only for Israel. You're only really ever a citizen of Israel no matter where you live. And so she got upset by this, right? She felt wronged as a politician, and all these other national politicians were signing pledges of loyalty to Israel, right? So she's been upset by this, and, you know, they wronged her, and then she's the one being demonized and called anti-Semitic. You understand this? And so, you know, that's effed up. Like, no matter how you look at it, it's effed up. And so I went to eat dinner. I was waiting for my wife, and I had the news on. It was on MSNBC, and they were, you know, all day this was coming up. I actually saw this at lunchtime as well on CNN and MSNBC. And they were talking about all these groups, and they were talking about stuff to happen on January 6th and other events that happen, right? And they were talking about all this sort of prejudice and hate, and they want to pass all kinds of new legislation about all these demographics. And if you look at what this, professor was saying, and you look at, the evidence behind it, that these groups are cutting themselves a good deal based in the model of victimhood and being oppressed and things like this. And they are pushing for a deal that other groups aren't getting. Every group is now claiming victimhood. Even you have all these white people now, white Christians, Republicans, who are claiming victimhood, and everyone's being marginalized, and everyone's, and this is what happens when you have, a group that's successful at using this model. It's a template, right? In fact, there's a video out there somewhere, I'm not going to look it up, of this woman, this Jewish woman saying it's their secret weapon, right? Using guilt and using, these past events as a weapon to push their agenda, to push their movement, right, for power and things like this. One of the beautiful teachings of the heartfulness system is that no one's a victim, right? That everything that you do is based in, everything that happens to you is based in what God and your soul and your samskaras, your past impressions, have set up in terms of life's events, right? That no matter what it is, how unfair it might seem, how, horrible it might be to go through, that it comes from God, that you don't, think things are random. I mean, people who don't have any faith at all, but if you have faith in God, then you have faith that there's a plan. And of course, human beings have freedom of choice, but you don't have to be on the receiving end of that choice, right? And so, it's a beautiful concept, and I've worked really hard to accept it. Like, it's not always easy, but my life has gotten so much better, and going through those events are so much easier when you're not, focused on being a victim. And I've had a lot of things that, in terms of what kind of person I am and what I've done in my life, these things seem really unfair, right? Really difficult things I went through, that seemed like, God was screwing me over, or just didn't seem, right. Even like, say, for example, this isn't such a horrible thing, but it's, I guess, a little bit annoying. Like I said, I do the heartfulness system. I'm a fringe person, and I don't fit in anywhere, right? As a so-called truther, being dyslexic, being an introvert, and people in the truth community, I've been talking about that for a while, we are, a villain now. Like, people who don't accept the official story and question, having the football pulled out from under us time and time again, question society. A lot of people have been through traumatic things, and they realize they can't trust the government, or they can't trust science, or whatever, the medical community. I mean, they've been wronged in some way by one or many of these institutions, right? And so, they have an awakening, and they no longer trust the government and the media and all. And the media has been caught lying, and Congress, I mean, it's Charlie Brown and the football all over again. And so the way they've dealt with this is, you're a villain for not accepting it. You're a crazy conspiracy theorist. And that's a way that you could say we're being victimized, all of us. I have to hear stories all the time on a daily basis, just the narrative. And it's, kind of, the gaslighting aspect of it, but, it's just a reminder that I don't fit in, right? And, I just have that kind of personality that I've always been sort of an outsider and a loner, so I'm not, I'm not really a people person. I mean, like I said, I have one friend from my old, college basketball days, things like this, who still tries to contact me. I make almost no effort. I am horrible at networking. Like I score as low as you could, like on networking potential and things like this. I don't reach out to people. I don't smooth things over. I mean, I just say things all the time that, you know, that I'm like, I bet that hurt that person's feelings. Like I didn't mean to, but I'm just, you know, I'm one of those people that don't really have the kind of social skills and don't put the effort into it. So I accept, you know, that part of it. But even like within the heartfulness system, have you ever seen, like many of you who are regular viewers, have you ever seen an old-time heartfulness person? Like I know hundreds of them. Like they know me. I mean, some of them I was sort of, you know, close with, right? And, you know, there's, I mean, maybe even more than hundreds. I might even know like thousands of people. And they probably all know about this YouTube channel, at least the ones in America. And they may or may not watch these videos. When I went to India, there was a guy from Australia who said, you know, I'm a real big fan. And he was like, you know, having a fan reaction. I was like, oh, that's weird, you know, because somebody I never met. But he listened to videos. Few people had talked to me. But they don't leave comments, right? Like I don't get any old school heartfulness people leaving comments. And for the most part, they don't like this channel. And even though they've had struggles with their own YouTube channel that I could help them with and bring people in, like I just know more than anybody else about this in the system, having a YouTube channel. And I reached out and I gave him information. And, you know, Dodgy, you know, said he understood and he thought, you know, there was one good idea about influencers. But in terms of the rest of them, they never got back to me, right? They don't, you know. And they've, you know, done things that was kind of, you know, off-putting that I'm not even going to get into in terms of they first didn't understand the channel and still don't, right? And they thought I was just one of these people who was taking official heartfulness stuff and publishing it as my own, which, you know, people do. And that's not what I do. They still, you know, don't really get it, right? And I could be upset about those things, right? Seems unfair. The way that my divorce went down and things like this. I mean, so many things that have happened to me or, you know, just, I was like, oh, it just left a bad taste in my mouth. But I've worked at this idea that it comes from God, even though people suck and I can, you know, identify the sucky people and say, all right, I don't want anything to do with you because, you know, I see the way you treat people. But the treatment that I receive from people, I, you know, work hard towards, and this is, again, part of the heartfulness teaching, to have this idea it comes from God and there's a reason for it happening. It's not random. And it's to help me get closer to God. And when I've taken that approach, you know, just even sometimes forcing myself to be grateful for something, to look at the bright side, right? I mean, you can always think of ways, you know, like I don't have like, you know, I don't want to jinx myself, but like some sort of, like I have cancer or, you know, some sort of horrible ailment or whatever, right? I think about the things that people go through, and you can always find somebody who's getting screwed over worse than you. I mean, you can drive out anytime, go to, you know, areas of where other people live or homeless people, or just look at, you know, people starving in different countries and realize that you're so much better off, at least on a material level, than so many other people. And so just to look at the things that you do have, you know, instead of the inconvenience and butthurtedness and things that you go through, right? So when I see these groups of people that are complaining all the time about being mistreated, and, you know, some of it's true, it's not like it's 100% made up. I mean, there are groups, and there's power groups, and some groups get screwed over more than other groups. But when people leverage victim consciousness to establish power and use manipulation and guilt and, you know, sanctimony and all this crap, I mean, at this point, you know, just stop, right? Like, you know, and if you are getting, you know, pushback and your group isn't liked, well, then stop doing things like this that bum people out. Stop pulling the football out and then acting like a victim, right? I mean, this is, you know, there's a reason for it, and eventually it'll turn. You're not getting away with this, right? You know, there's no chosen people out there. I mean, each group thinks they're chosen, but there's no chosen people. God doesn't choose a specific people, despite what you've been told by your, you know, religious teachings. There's no chosen ones, right? you work and you do a good job and you be a great person, a saint, you give and you work for God, assiduously, and you open your heart and you pour out, love to them like the masters of the heartfulness system. And when you see people like this who live in such a way, and you see all these other people who are whining about things that, are just, problems of their own creation, you can see why humanity's been heading in the wrong direction. And so with everybody having their hand out and complaining that they're some sort of a victim, and now this is a cultural movement, and every time you turn on the news, if you wait long enough, you'll find a story about one group or another and how they're being, treated, mistreated, and all these other things. And they want more power, and when they get the power and they're on top, they become tyrannical, and they force their crappy agenda, and they oppress people. And so, like I've said over and over again, you can only fix yourself. You can be a better person. And that's personal responsibility that comes from understanding that your life is mapped out in front of you, and you embrace your soul and God internally, and you ignore all this stuff, the so-called haters and the people outside you that are, doing whatever. And you just take personal responsibility and you become a frickin' adult. Then you can start changing yourself and making the world a better place. Only spirituality will save this world. It's Baramano. Definitely reporting from the Apocalypse and the Ascension. Everyone have a blessed day and be grateful.